All right.
This week on Mutant Watch.
Not Mutant Watch. This is the Comic Watchers, episode 244. And because it's that time of the year where we expect to have ghosts, terrorizing rich people so that they pay their employees, a fair amount for the. We have
I don't think
as
that's the way the
the
country's going, but okay.
yeah, yeah. Well, we can hope. But we have the creative team from Marley's Ghost, which is from Ablaze, and I'll let you guys introduce yourself, and I'll let you start off by introducing yourself and tell us how you got into comic books um, and how you got into comics as a reader and professionally.
Who goes first?
I can go first.
Go, Josh. Go.
My name is Josh O'Neill. I am currently. I publish a company called Beehive Books. We're a small arts press based in Philadelphia. We do a lot of illustrated fiction and comics. I'm also a comics writer. And how did I get into comics? I don't remember. I grew up reading them. I read comics my entire life in the newspaper and superhero comics. And as a child, all I ever wanted to do was read comics. It was my single favorite activity on this earth. And I really got into the comics industry through working at, and then eventually owning a comic shop in the late 2000 aughts, I guess. And we had a sort of community of artists and writers that built up around that shop. So we started publishing anthologies and magazines through that shop. That's kind of how I got into publishing. We ran a festival. That's how I met Gideon, and we've worked together on a number of things. And yeah, we got to work together on this great Marley's Ghost project, which was a total privilege.
Shannon.
Oh, geez. How I started, I guess in high school? No, junior high. When I was a kid, even I loved comics, and I thought they were magic, and I always wanted to figure out how to do those magic tricks. And in college, I started doing newspaper strips, and then after college, I moved to Texas and met comic book people and started doing zines, mini comics, and Chris Ware and Robert Rodriguez and I don't know, Tom King. There's a whole group of people there. So just tried to figure out. Yeah, I just started doing Too Much Coffee Man, and then I guess about I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, I started at the New Yorker doing gag cartoons and had to figure out a whole new way of doing comics. And yeah, brevity is what I learned from doing the gag cartoons.
Well, besides your Too Much Coffee Man, I think one of my first introductions to you was God's Disappointed with You, which you did with Mark Russell.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, I genuinely, I really like collaborating, and it that was Mark had done some zines himself, and I met him at a zine symposium, and I liked what he had done so much. I just bugged him and said, let's work on if you ever have a project, let's work together. I'll do the illustrations, you do the writing. And then one time we were hanging out at a bar and we're talking about the Bible, and yeah, I said, oh, let's do the Bible. You rewrite it and I'll do these cartoons. And um, yeah, I don't know. So we did. I'm not religious, but I've always wanted to read the Bible, so it was a good excuse. We thought it would be like a 6-month project, and it turned into sort of a 4-year effort.
And I think I got the copy of God is Disappointed and you won your Comic-Con.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that was
So,
fun. That was a great project, and we kept expecting there to be backlash from religious people, and we didn't get that. And it's not. We didn't intend it to be a mean-spirited. It wasn't a takedown.
mhm.
It wasn't. We weren't trying to build up the Bible to be anything. It was just, hey, what is this saying? And we tried to and tried to reflect that. And we've done readings in churches and things like that. It's a great way to
Really?
learn the Bible. Yeah. The time I got yelled at once, but it was a woman who came up and started pounding on the table, telling me that what I was doing was evil and wrong, and I was hey, just check it out. It's not, we're not making fun of the Bible. She goes, I know the Bible is evil. Any promotion of it is
He's like a
bad.
Satanist.
It's like, oh man, an atheist. Of course, I get yelled at by an atheist.
That's amazing.
And sorry to get us off track with that, but Gideon,
Let's see.
first off, happy birthday, right?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, thank you. Yeah.
Birthday good.
Thanks a lot. Hey, this is great. Yeah, this is an excellent way to celebrate my birthday, talking about comics. I love it. So when I was a little kid, I mean, all I ever wanted to do was draw. And when I was little, my parents, they were hippies, and there was a lot of underground comics floating around the house. And then I remember there being like Doonesbury anthologies and the B. Kleban books. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but Kleban, those books were always around. And then, then I discovered Marvel Comics probably in 5th grade, maybe 6th grade. And that was it for me. And I just wanted to be one of those guys, especially when I realized that they drew, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. I thought that sounds like the best thing in the world. So I tried to make comics, and I'm sure they were terrible. I don't have any of them anymore. And then I lost my way for about 30 years. I went to fine art school and worked in animation and played in a lot of bands and tried to illustrate children's books, and didn't find my way back to comics till I was almost 40. And then within a couple of years, I was working on this book that Harvey Kurtzman had started. And I guess I finally found, after all that time, I found my way back to where I was supposed to be.
Well, to kind of thanks for the segue, by the way. But I met Josh and Gideon at New York Comic Con at the Comixology brunch, where they were serving some pretty strong mimosas.
An impressive spread.
I didn't have to eat for the rest of the day.
Yeah, that was nice.
But you guys were the first, if I remember correctly, you guys were the first to present about about Marley's Ghost being on Comixology, and it was a really interesting, and I talked to you guys afterwards, and that's why we're here today. So, tell us a little bit about Marley's Ghost, because there's kind of a history to it. Besides, it's being, this little piece of fiction that Charles Dickens wrote that some people like to put their spin on, but so give some history about the project.
Josh, you want to
It
do
sort of
that?
starts in the 1950s when Harvey Kurtzman kind of tries to invent the graphic novel single-handedly, but can't find a publisher to put it out for him. He had this idea. He wanted to adapt A Christmas Carol, but he didn't just want to do it in comics. He wanted to do it in a book format. He wanted it to be like the format of a novel, like come out from a major publisher like Simon and Schuster, and to be a bound book and to be one piece of sort of literary comics fiction. But that was really something that did not exist back then. So he put together like a little pitch package. He drew a handful of these beautiful finished pages, and he did thumbnails of almost probably a third of the book, or a little less than that, quarter of the book, and a little document explaining what he wanted to do. And he sent it out to a bunch of publishers, but nobody bit on it. And it was sort of this great lost project because the pages are absolutely amazing. He also commissioned a guest page from Jack Davis. I think he was considering either drawing it himself or maybe writing it and partnering with somebody who would draw it. And then it just kind of sat there for 60, 70 years after that. And it was through Dennis Kitchen and John Lind and Chip Mosier, who Dennis represents the Harvey Kurtzman estate and works with Adele Kurtzman. And they had talked for years about this great unfinished project and if there was something they could do with it, if there was some way to publish the existing material or finish it somehow. So they sort of commissioned Shannon and Gideon and I to figure out exactly how to turn it into a comic. So sort of took the pages that Harvey had done and the thumbnails and the sort of ideas that he had and the script that he had written and took that and developed it into the full graphic novel that Marley's Ghost is now. And, I'm sure it's not the way that Harvey Kurtzman would have done it. None of us are Harvey Kurtzman and none of us have even access to him to ask him what he would have done. But we just tried to take everything we knew about the million lessons of storytelling you learn from reading Harvey Kurtzman and from the beautiful work that he had done on this pitch, and try to finish it in a way that we hoped he would appreciate and be proud of.
Now, was there some sense of, working with Kurtzman's, material that is just like, I don't want to mess it up, and I want to make sure we capture the spirit of what he originally intended it to be?
Yeah,
oh, absolutely. It was totally intimidating. It was my first graphic novel, and for my first paid work in comics, really. So yeah, it was terrifying, and lots of incredible lessons to learn from seeing what he had done on it, on the work that he had done and the pages that he had made. I forget exactly how many pages he finished, but then there were an additional group of pages that were sketchier, and eventually it kind of peters out into just these very, very, very loose thumbnails, almost just like stick figures. In fact, like by the last page, he was just like writing a couple of words, and and he was losing interest or getting discouraged. I'm not sure, but it's kind of like there's gradually less and less to work with. So it's kind of like training wheels in a way. As we went along, we got our own momentum based on what he had done, and then kept going when his stuff ran out.
But Kurtzman is really kinetic, and Gideon has that. It comes naturally to him. So, I mean, that meshing of the styles is pretty natural. It worked really well, I thought.
Well, Kurtzman's work is so reduced to only what's necessary, and it does have a lot of motion in it. And I think that that is what I have in common with him. Like, I'm very interested in body language and understanding like how expression and action are conveyed by the human figure. Like, that's very interesting to me, but I could never be as reduced and like just putting down only what's important the way that Kurtzman does. So the fact that he had Jack Davis do a page I kind of felt like that was my in, because I've definitely been accused of aping Jack Davis. So I kind of went with more of the Jack Davis approach. I wish I could have the brevity and the clarity of Kurtzman, but Shannon was kind of our brevity consultant. Like, we would show Shannon what we were working on, and he would say less, or you don't need that, cut that. Like, just get down to what the bare essentials of what the story needed, because I definitely have a tendency to overwork things, and I think Josh also doesn't mind a nice overly elaborate, juicy sentence, So there was definitely stuff that had to be pruned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Shannon was really telling us to do less, which is the most reliable editorial note you can give somebody. You can almost never go wrong. Like, nobody's ever not doing enough,
Well, except you have to finish the book. You got to finish the book.
Yeah. But doing less, the book gets finished faster if you do less.
True.
So, I, I read the copy, and it reads, it's a pretty straightforward adaptation of the Dickens work. Am I correct?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I
I
mean
mean the
it's
language.
very
Yeah.
true to the text, I think. Sorry, go ahead,
Oh
Shannon.
no, 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 please. Yeah, it is true to the text. That's we're gonna say the same thing. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, and I think that was really part of Kurtzman's vision for it, was that he didn't want to do like a spin-off where it tells a new story inside the Christmas Carol world. It was, based on the pages we have from him, it really is like line by line in the book. There were some things he leaves out just because the comics language is so different. You can't really fit everything that you can fit into a novel into a comic, but you could really tell he was like going through the novel word by word and trying to figure out how to get this onto the page, and was also using a lot of the language directly from the book. So we tried to do a lot of that as much as possible. But I mean, that's the interesting challenge. It's a novel and a comic are such just radically different forms of storytelling, and what works in one absolutely doesn't work in the other. So the creative challenge was more to be true to it while making something that works as well as it possibly can, and hopefully close to as well as the book does, which is obviously hard because it's one of the greatest books 19th century probably.
I can't remember. Did we leave anything out, or I don't recall us like leaving out any sequence. I mean, there's a few places where Dickens goes into some kind of almost kind of there's that whole bit where he's talking about the cousin or something,
Yeah.
and he's getting a little bit turned on, I guess.
Yes.
And we left that out.
We did leave that out. That's true. That's true. No, I don't think there's any story aspects that we left out. There's bits of conversation certainly that are left out. There's lots of lines of dialogue that we left out and trimmed back. But no, in terms of like the scenes that are in the book, I think every scene that's in the book is probably in our version of it too.
We also watched every version that's ever been put to film or video of it. And I mean, I was doing that largely to try to collect reference materials and figure out what Victorian outfits looked like from the back, because it's easy to find pictures of Victorian clothing online or in books that shows what it looks like from the front, but not so much from the back. And what's that, Josh? What's the thing called? You knew the word, the kind of coat. It's like an Inverness
Yes,
coat, right?
yes.
I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know
I
that
don't think
word.
I did either. I figured it out somehow. I don't know. I don't remember how I figured that out, but it wasn't just something I had in my mind.
But I remember going through the movies and like trying to find places where I could pause it to see what the clothing looked like from the back, because I had no idea. And for that stuff, actually, there's a couple of the versions that were really poorly made, where the lighting is like kind of awful and cheap. And those versions were great because you could actually see the clothing, more so than like in the classic black and white movie, which is the coolest one and the best looking one, but not so great for picture reference.
Yeah, I think maybe one place we like diverge, not necessarily from the book, but from the tone of some of the adaptations, is one thing we sussed out in some of the Kurtzman material was we felt like he was really interested in the spookier, more ghostly aspects of it. And he had retitled it. I mean, it wasn't called A Christmas Carol. It was called Marley's Ghost. And ours is called Harvey Kurtzman's Marley's Ghost, which is probably the only book that ever has two consecutive possessives in the title.
We thought that would be, that's what would make it a hit. People would just really dig that.
If we can get a third possessive in there, yeah. I think maybe that's a note that Shannon did give us at some point. Get rid of one of these possessives, but it was above our pay grade.
Yeah, couldn't do it. Yeah. We tried.
But yeah, like we really felt like he was very interested in the spooky, creepy, ghostly aspects of the story. And I know for me, that's a lot of what I love about A Christmas Carol too. And I think it gets left out sometimes in the adaptations that are so inspirational and cozy and Christmassy. Sometimes like the dark, like it's a pretty dark book in a lot of ways. It's really about someone who has like hollowed out their own soul over the course of, you know, a long life, and there's very little left, and sort of what it takes to reattain some kind of humanity. And you know, it's full of these terrifying ghostly visitations. So that's something I think we really tried to highlight, which we thought Kurtzman was interested in too.
Yeah, and also to show, like, in the scenes of destitution and starvation, I wanted to do my best to make those scenes feel raw and to actually have that feeling come across in the book, because, you know, it's very easy to make the book kind of be about, oh, you know, just give some money to the poor at Christmas, or like once a year, you know, do that. And there's even that bit in the story where Scrooge actually kind of calls out the ghost of Christmas Present for that. And I feel like that's almost the hidden theme of the book, is like, what does it really mean to be a kind person in a world that's so full of awfulness and unfairness, you know? And so in those scenes, like, I went back and I looked at Doré's engravings of the slums of London from that era. And then I also looked at the work of the German artist from the early part of the 20th century. I'm going to pronounce her name wrong, but Kata Kollwitz. I looked at her work a lot. In fact, there's one page early on in the book where I did my best to pay homage to one of her images of a mother holding her dying child. And I just wanted to put some of that in there so that it didn't just feel like an easy out, you know? I mean, it still is, because it, you know, at the end, everything's fine. But I wanted some of those things to feel hard, you know.
Yeah, I mean, Dickens was very unflinching about poverty in like all of his books. It's something he was definitely like interested in, and often the adaptations really leave that element out. You know, they're like sort of tropes of like the beggar is like a type more than it's like actually a form of human suffering that you see.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that was really, I think like restoring like the politics of the book, which I think sometimes get left off in sort of service of a more, you know, just a more moralistic kind of story, as opposed to something that's a little bit like has a little more edge to it.
So one of my, you know, watching the different versions of, you know, the Christmas Carol is how the ghosts are represented. Talk a little bit about coming up with its design, because the Ghost of Christmas Present is kind of like the ghost that, you know, that you usually see. But I mean, talk a little bit about coming up with the designs for the ghosts.
Let's see. Well, I mean, the Ghost of Christmas Present is the most fun because he's like this big, hairy, flabby, kind of a little bit perverse, kind of gluttonous guy. So, I mean, that was super fun. That was super fun to draw, and we kind of leaned into that. There's where you got a little nice shot of his hairy inner thigh there. That was fun.
Yeah, I noticed the way that his robe kind of swayed up, you know.
Yeah. So we lean into that. The Ghost of Christmas Past is, I mean, she's kind of like a tour guide. I mean, I guess they all are, but I don't know. Like for that one, I actually used my mom as a hand model for that. My mom has these very long, thin, bony fingers, and so I had her be my hand model for that. I took a lot of pictures of her hands, making the gestures that I wanted in the poses. I don't think I really gave a whole lot of thought to her, but I know that for the Ghost of Christmas Future, I mean, I'll be honest, I was really just thinking of Bill Sienkiewicz's Moon Knight and the way he would always draw him, like
I love that.
kind of just like swaying, you know, and the cowl and everything. So I just like removed the arms and legs and tried to draw that swaying cape and the sort of like hunching, hovering thing for him.
Because I mean, one of the I'll go ahead and say it. My favorite version of the Christmas Carol is the Muppets one. Okay, I said it.
Everybody says that, yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that might be mine too. I love the Muppets Christmas Carol.
I'm going to watch that this weekend for sure.
It's so good.
It's been playing here since before Thanksgiving. So, I mean, Michael Caine is such a great Scrooge. He's like, this is a Muppets movie, but I'm going to play this as serious as a car wreck.
He plays it so straight. That's why it's so good. He plays it totally straight. It's like it's a BBC movie.
Yeah.
I don't remember what are the. I mean, I haven't seen it in so many years. I can't even remember what the ghosts look like in it. But
Well, the Ghost of Christmas Present looks like the one in the book, the jovial, Dionys, Bacchus type
right.
character, and then the Ghost of Future Past is just like this big hood, and he just points and and he doesn't say anything, and that's when Gonzo and Rizzo leave and come back at the finale, and so.
Yeah, but, I think we just like wanted him to be, as different from the other ones as possible, and as stripped of humanity as possible. So I think that's why I ripped his arms off.
So I know there's a interesting backstory, Gideon, about coming up with Scrooge and his dress wear in the book.
Oh yeah. So I was like Josh and I were or I was doing the thumbnails for it, and I just kept thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna have to draw Scrooge. Like, he gets put through the ringer in this book, and he has to crawl around on the floor, and he's lifted up by the scruff of his nightgown and carried through the sky. And I'm thinking, I do not know how to draw a nightgown, a Victorian nightgown. And I know from my own work that it's always better if I have some practice and like something to refer to, especially for the main character in a book. I always like to have a model and get them some semblance of the costume, so that the main character of the book always feels as believable and as there, like in the pictures, as possible. So the challenge was, I have a good friend who definitely has a Scrooge look to him. He's 6'3" and doesn't have an ounce of fat on his body, and he's got a big nose and the whole deal, big chin. But it's hard to find a Victorian nightgown for a 6'3" dude. I looked all over the place, and eventually I decided to hire a seamstress and have them make a nightgown. Following, looking at pictures online and trying to make something as authentic as possible. And she did an amazing job. Her name is Linda Milliron, and she did an incredible job with it. And then my friend was willing to put on this nightgown and come over here to my studio and take every pose basically in the book, and crawl around on the floor and do all kinds of demeaning stuff. And those pictures were really helpful, just to help me understand,
which is nice.
Help me understand what happens with the drapery and the folds of the outfit in all those complicated positions. And it made my job a lot easier. It was a lot of work up front, but it made the job of making finishing the artwork a whole lot easier. And now I've got like 500 really embarrassing pictures of my friend.
You should publish those.
Hey, someday, when we make the hardcover deluxe version, we'll put them all in there.
Did you take those pics after you had thumbnailed the entire book, so you knew what all the panels were and what all the pictures were?
Yeah, I knew what poses for him to take and camera angles and stuff like that.
Right.
And I didn't need one for every picture. It was really more for like the complex ones.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about the the creative process of the three of you working together, to bring everything together. How did that work? Were there any challenges, or what worked, what didn't?
Well, we don't live anywhere near each other, but I mean that doesn't matter so much in this day and age. Josh did take a couple of train trips up from Philadelphia to come work here with me, and that was fun. But Shannon was like the voice of reason from afar.
Yes.
I felt like the anti-creative person. It was the first time I'd done something like I'd done that type of thinking for my own stuff as I was trying to figure out New Yorker cartoons, but
Right.
never for somebody else. But it's just like, oh, here's a picture of somebody knocking on a door, and there's a long bit of text, describing it, and then it's weird to be killing Dickens' words, saying, yeah, you don't need, and you see it, and so just take all this out.
Right. I mean,
But
that's
I
like
felt,
standard. Sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah, I felt like a jerk doing it.
But I mean, that's like the comics. That's like the standard comics. It's what you have to do in comics
Yes.
because there is pictures and words, and Dickens didn't know that, but Dickens' words are great, so it's really hard to cut them out.
They are
that was
great,
the
but there's
thing.
also a lot of them. Like Dickens was a wordy writer. He loved language, and his language is so beautiful.
And you can see
by the word, and you can feel it sometimes.
You can see in the pages that Kurtzman made that he's trying to put in a lot of the words. But again, to his credit, this was like a new thing.
Yeah.
Like, and there's no way of knowing, but I kind of wonder if he had kept going on the project, if he would have eventually come to the conclusion, like, we don't need all these words, like, and gone back and taken some of them out, because you can see that redundancy in his original pages, but that's because he was making something new.
Yeah, that is one key place we maybe diverged from his initial vision a little bit, which I do think he was trying to include like as much of the best of the text as he could without making the pages feel overcrowded and hectic and difficult to read. But I think like, he wanted you to walk away kind of having read Dickens's book, and it just felt like too much. It's just like it's one thing when you do that for 6 pages or 8 pages, but when you're doing it for 120 or 30 or however many pages this book was, it feels like too much text. It doesn't feel like the way to tell the story. And we told ourselves that Kurtzman might have come to that realization too. But also, it did feel like for the best for the book, or maybe he's, shaking his fist at us from beyond the grave for ruining his vision.
Also, we wanted to make sure the book would be readable for a younger person too. I mean, the art style isn't like kids' comics necessarily, but it is. We wanted to make sure it was kid friendly, and that if a 9-year-old, if a precocious 9-year-old comics fan picked it up, that the text wouldn't be so cumbersome that they might not, fully get into it,
Now, I know that and please correct me if I'm wrong. Has been released or was first released as a digital comic on Comixology, and there's going to be a solid book print coming out at the end of the month. So when you were you writing it for like a hard copy or with digital in mind?
Well, it was originally just a digital book. I mean, Comixology was the company that put it out, and so it was digital only. I think all three of us, you guys tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. Like, we're older people, and to us, comics kind of only exist if they're on paper. So I certainly couldn't help but imagine it being on paper, even though it took until now with Ablaze, I guess, partnering with Comixology for there to finally be a print edition. And so, it feels much more real to me now, certainly, to be able to hold it in my wrinkled and withered hands.
And you formatted it too to be a comic page.
That's also true. Like, I didn't know what else to do. In fact, I think that if I'd known a little bit more about digital comics, I probably wouldn't have done so much panel overlapping and crazy panel shapes. I know that it made it difficult for them to have it function on their, whatever it's called, their e-reader.
Guided view or something.
Yeah,
It drove
I
them
know that.
crazy.
I know that
absolutely crazy.
They were a little frustrated with me, but I, no one, like, I didn't know, like, I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't know what guided view meant. I didn't know what digital comics meant. All I knew is that I was making a graphic novel for the first time in my life, and I wanted to make it as cool looking as I could. And for me, that means composing the page as a complete image. Sometimes to a fault. I know that I tend to overlap my panels maybe a little too much, but that's what I do, and that's what I did. And now that it's in print, I think that is finally in a place where it makes sense and where it's not driving anyone on the tech side crazy.
Yeah, I mean, this comic won the Eisner Award for Best Digital Comic, which I find very funny because we did everything wrong basically in terms of making a digital comic, and we had no idea what we were doing.
They just had to step up. They had to up their game on making it work, because they put their A team on it.
Yeah, they may have had to develop new technologies like to make this real.
They hustled it
on a device.
Yeah. But what I always loved about comics, one of the many things I loved about comics when I was a kid, as opposed to movies, as opposed to something that's on a screen, was that elastic play that you had with panel sizes, that you have this rhythm and this degree of like accent or pull back based on relative panel size. And I couldn't, like, that's just how I think about comics and about the pacing of a page and the pacing of a story. And so if you lose that, to me, it's like you're losing one of the most amazing things about comics, because in a movie the screen is always the same size, but in comics that's not true, and that's one of the great things about it. I mean, really, I love drawing, and I love just getting lost in the inking and the rendering and the shading and all that, but the purely most fun part of making a comic is the thumbnailing, because that is the pure translation of what's written down into like how you're going to tell the story. And so much of that for me is about, okay, what size is this panel going to be in relation to the one before it and the one after it?
Well, there's a story, I don't know if the story is true or apocryphal or not, but there's a story about when Orson Welles was making Citizen Kane. Greg Toland, who was the great early Hollywood cinematographer who filmed Citizen Kane, came to him and said, I want to work on this movie. And Orson Welles said, why? I'm 23 years old. I'm nobody. Like, you're one of the most renowned cinematographers. Why do you want to work on my movie? And he said, because you have no idea what you're doing. So you'll do something interesting, probably. He was like, you don't know how to make a movie. So that's way more fun than somebody who knows how to make a movie. So maybe that worked a little bit for us in digital comics.
Yeah, that was me. Again, this was my first graphic novel. So I learned a lot working on it, that's for sure. And yet at the same time, I'm not sure if I've made anything better since it. So
that's an amazing piece of work.
It is.
It is. Now, Gideon, did you do the art digitally? Did you do,
So I used to, of course, I've been doing illustration and animation since the late 80s. So I didn't work digitally up until the early 2000s, but when a lot of the animation studios that I was working for and a lot of the clients I was doing children's book illustration or other kinds of illustration for started to expect things to be digital just so they could be done faster and changes could be made easier. And so I was really getting used to working digitally. And then this I started making comics, and the hardest thing for me was to figure out how to fit everything on a page. I kept making things too big and not leaving enough room for the text. And so the ability to resize things and move things around just was such a nice crutch. And I mean, it was a crutch, but it was a really nice crutch to have. And so I basically kept working digitally when I started making comics again, just for that reason, just because I didn't think I could get enough work done to, of a quality that I would be happy with if I didn't have that crutch. So what I would do for my books back then and on this book is I did all my thumbnails on index cards, just with Sharpies and pencil and ballpoint pen. And then I just take photos of those index cards, bring those into the template in Photoshop, and pencil, ink, and letter. Now I've gone back to doing my pencil pages on paper. One, just to get away from the computer. Also, I think now that I've been doing comics for about 15 years, I'm a little better at planning ahead and figuring out what's going to work. Although I still, once I scan in my pencils, I often still resize things. But I do all my inks and coloring digitally still.
And so you colored and lettered the book?
Yes, we used a Comic Craft font called Hush Hush, which is it's got a classic comics look to it, but it's also just a little bit gothic. I think it's been used on some Batman books. We were just looking around on Comic Craft for something that felt right. And I mean, before this book, like the self-published stuff that I was doing, like when I met Josh, that stuff I lettered by hand. And I have a very idiosyncratic hand lettering style, which works for some of what I do, but it wasn't going to work for Comixology. They needed something more accessible and frankly legible.
So Josh and Shannon, I mean, just hearing Gideon, talk about, how he what he learned through this process. Did you guys learn anything or take anything away from this project that you'll be able to use in future projects?
Never to work with me again.
Don't be silly. It was a privilege. I was just a reductionist, so my role in it, yeah, I guess in a way for me is how can I apply that to my own, what can I take out and reduce of my own stuff. So yeah, I learned a lot. I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot from your approach, Shannon, about like doing less, which I definitely is something I think about all the time on every project I've worked on since. And I think maybe something like both Gideon and I learned together a little bit is, you sort of can't be cowed by the material that you're working with, especially when you're working with something that's so special to you. I mean, I'm sure I've never really worked on superhero comics, but I'm sure people feel this when they're working on Batman and things like that. If they grew up reading Batman, if they love that kind of stuff, like I felt that way about Dickens. I felt that way about Kurtzman. But as you're making the thing, like ultimately you have to let the dictates of the thing rule over the sacredness of any of the things that are meaningful about it. Like ultimately it's going to have its own form that it's going to take, and it's going to have its own directions it wants to take, and you have to be willing to follow those things, or you're going to get stuck in some kind of rote formulaic. You're just going to be a lesser version of something else because you're going to be trying to recreate something that already exists. So I've, in Beehive, we do a lot of like illustrated versions of classic fiction, and we do a lot of art books about historical artists. So we work with a lot of stuff that's very sacred to me. But I think about that all the time. You kind of you can't let it be too sacred, or else you won't do right by the people who you're trying to honor, because you'll water them down by trying to like freeze them behind glass.
It was great to have. I was going to say it was great to work with Josh and Shannon, so that kind of got me out of that too. Like, I think I could have just gotten completely frozen just thinking about Kurtzman or thinking about Dickens, instead of being like, hey, no, it's the three of us making this book. And especially once we moved past the pages that Kurtzman had done, it was like, no, we're just making a book, and we're working with each other. We're relying on each other to figure out what's best to do.
Yeah,
come out of
here. If they were here, then they would work on it with us. But
right? Yeah,
they're not. So we got to do this.
I was just going to say that I'd come out of working on the Bible, so I'd been taking
as one does
the Word of God and cutting it down to. So this was nothing compared
to. Is there? I know it's probably. You don't want to get, I guess, pigeonholed into those guys that do adaptations of books, but are there any other books that perhaps that you would be interested in giving a similar treatment to?
Sure, all of them.
All of them, one by one, each book.
Well, okay, this is like very esoteric, but the book that I've always wanted to do a graphic novel adaptation of, that would probably be impossible and I'd end up wanting to kill myself, is the Mezzanine by Nicholson Baker.
Wow, that's a great I love that book.
Because the whole thing takes place in the time it takes this guy to go up an escalator in the lobby of a building. Yeah. It's just every single thought that runs through his head. And again, like, I probably don't want to do this, but
how would you do it? How would you do? Like,
I do not know.
Yeah,
I do not know, but I just think that that might be an okay way to die, like trying to do that.
I love that idea. That sounds great. I think you should do it.
or really, like, I'd love to do like a great classic science fiction book. That would be really fun to do.
Heinlein needs some good editing, I think. If you're going to attack some classic, if you've reread any Heinlein, it doesn't quite hold up to the modern.
All right, well, you guys write up a treatment, and I'll start drawing.
I'm in.
Well,
I'm in. How about the Power Broker?
I don't know if you guys are. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but after looking at this book, I think I really would love to see you guys do an adaptation of C.S. Lewis's sci-fi trilogy. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I love those books.
Of course, yeah.
Well, Josh and I are working on our own little, like, crazy fantasy sci-fi book, but we'll have a ways to go with that. Yeah. That's not an adaptation. That's Josh's own creation.
I mean, ours, really. We've sort of been writing it together.
Yeah, but I mean, it was your baby. You brought it.
Kind of jumping off that, how is doing an adaptation different to writing original stuff for you guys, or working on an adaptation different to working on original stuff?
Well, I would say, there's pluses and minuses. The plus is that you got some training wheels to go with. You have a frame of reference, and you don't have to do all the mental work yourself. The downside is that you have someone else's expectations, real or imagined, to deal with. Like for this, especially at the start, until we got our own momentum going, I just kept thinking, oh God, Kurtzman, oh God, Dickens, or like, oh God, what are the people who love either of those people going to think about this nobody, ruining their work? But I mean, since then, I've worked with Eric Powell on one of his characters, and that was really fun. He knows how to write really good, fun comics. But it was.
And he did a great adaptation of the Christmas Carol too.
That's right. But like, being given a character by him and being like, okay, here, make this your own. That was a challenge. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Josh?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a very hard question to answer because
You've done so many, like you were saying, all those books that Beehive has made where you're reimagining all these classic works.
It's like a total, it's hard to even compare the two things because it's such a radically different process in so many ways. Like when you're adapting something, like the biggest thing I think about is like how not to subtract value from it, how not to just turn this into something that is the same but worse. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which is what so many adaptations of things wind up being. They wind up being just kind of a carbon copy, but less good, less interesting, kind of lacking the electricity of the original thing. So it's like, if you're going to the trouble of adapting something, you obviously believe it has some kind of vitality to it. It has some electricity that's being translated still, whether it's something old or something more recent. But the only way to maintain that is by like adding like a new element to it, because like that's what makes creative projects exciting, is like when you can feel the energy of like the creator like channeling something that's of their own creation and like of their own invention. So I mean, that's the assignment when you're creating something new. Like it's up to you to bring all of that vitality and electricity. But when you're adapting something, the question is, how do you do that in a way that kind of agrees with the thing that you're working on and doesn't like cut the thing off at its knees and take it in some radically different direction that doesn't honor what was interesting about it in the first place. But the worst thing you can do is be too faithful, in my opinion. I mean, we do a lot of illustrated fiction at Beehive. We don't do a lot of comics adaptations, but we do a ton of illustrated fiction, illustrated versions of great books. And that's the thing, like, the biggest editorial note I give people is always just like, don't draw the book. Just like, don't draw the scenes from the book. Like, that's the worst thing you can do, is just draw all the stuff that happens. Like, find some new way in, find something else that's exciting to you. That's like not what you would guess, like the author. Because like, you don't, like, books exist already. Like, we don't need, the reader's job is to picture the words. Like, the words create pictures in the reader's head. You don't need, an artist to
you really don't need an artist. I don't even know why we made this book.
No, you need an artist to do something else. Like, my point is, you don't need the artist to do the reader's imagining for them. You need them to bring their own imagination. You need them to bring a third thing, like, because you have the text already, and then if you just have images that are just depictions of the text, like that doesn't have fundamental value.
Right.
But if it's channeling something that's inside of the artist and the author, and like if it's bringing something of their personality that works and it illuminates new parts of the things you're working on, like, that to me is the job. And it's such a different challenge. It's hard to compare one to the other.
Or Shannon, in your case, you just had to make sure that God wasn't gonna, like, strike you dead with a bolt of lightning.
Yeah, Hosea especially. That was my favorite. Yeah, no, I think Josh is totally right about that. You bring something in, but what I'm working on a autobiographical piece now, and it's this similar editing process where the memories are just rich, and the more you pull on a thread, the more memories emerge, and you really have to cut it down to what are the beats that make this thing work. Right now I'm working on a little piece where my mom took me to see Jim Jones, or she took us to see Jim Jones, and I'm trying, like, the more I work on it, the more I'm remembering the people I talked to and playing with the kids and drinking the Kool-Aid, which is kind of creepy. It wasn't Kool-Aid, but yeah, we didn't have that at my house. And so I'm one of the people that drank that grape drink, and I remember it. And yeah, it's creepy, and I have all these memories, and which ones do I pick to create this little bit of a thread of a story and make it electric. I think that's a perfect description.
It's interesting that you brought up auto-bio stuff, because I've done a fair amount of that, and that then you're almost sort of collaborating with yourself.
It's a nightmare. The more I do it, I think about what you've done, and I'm filled with awe with what you've done. I mean, it's just impressive how much you've done of that. It's great.
It's like half the work is done for you, but then you have to. Well, first, thanks, but yeah, it's I like it because I'm not a super productive writer. Like I've had maybe maybe three fiction ideas in my entire life. But I've had a lot of weird things happen to me in my life, and I grew up under weird circumstances. So there's material there, but then like Josh, what you were saying about don't just draw the story. It's really, really straightforward auto-bio stuff can be pretty boring and a lot to expect someone to read. You need to bring something to it that's generous. I think. I mean, there's a whole world of auto-bio stuff that's intentionally the opposite of that. Where it's no, this is just completely straightforward, and that's the point of it. But to me, that isn't entertainment. Which,
I'm with you. I think you're right.
So as we kind of wrap up the show here, is there anything else about the book that maybe anybody would like to mention that maybe we didn't talk about?
It makes an excellent holiday gift. And if you buy 15 copies of it for everyone you know, then you're done with your holiday shopping. Oh, Josh, you're muted.
I'm excited. I haven't seen the printed copy yet. I'm waiting for one to arrive.
No, they did a great job with it. I didn't get my comps either, but I saw Gideon's, and they.
Oh, Shannon, send me your address, and I'll put some in the mail for you.
Well, won't they send me some? I mean,
I hope so. I mean, that would be great, but I don't want you to have to wait too long.
I don't want to tap your. I do need to give out some Christmas presents, so if I can get them early enough, then.
Well,
sign them. It might be worth it. I'll do that. I do want it signed though. Just one copy is good for me.
All right.
So why don't, as we kind of close up here, why don't we go around, and if you have anything you'd like to promote or where people can find you on the social media if you're still there. I know Shannon, you just wrapped up about a month or so ago a Kickstarter.
Yeah, and I'm slowly putting together collections of the work I did 25 years ago. So this is the second Too Much Coffee Man book of that. It'll have the mini comics and little short stories and odds and ends. The one that we shot with a gun. Yeah, the dumb stuff. And then I've got the color work next after this. And then I have a book of dirty cartoons that I've done that I want to put together. Yeah, and then that Camp Micropenis is what I want to call the dirty cartoons. And then the one with the Jim Jones story and all the stuff. My dad had a commune, so I've got all these memories of commune life. So my father is what I have that one. And that'll come up. So I don't know what I'm doing. I have my opera I'm working on too. So it's lots of dumb stuff. Substack. I've got a newsletter. That's where they
I love it.
follow me. Yes.
I guess I'll go next. So yeah, I'm on the socials. I'm just my name. I mean, I have a weird name. So if you search Gideon Kendall, I'll come up. On Instagram, that's where I am most active. I'm also on Blue Sky and Facebook, and I have a YouTube channel now, and I've been making little process videos of like my life drawings and some of my comics work too. So you can find me there. I just published an anthology hardcover came out of all the autobio comics that I've done over the last 12 years or so with my partner in that endeavor, Doug Latino, and that's published by Cosmic Lion. That just came out. And then also my other autobio project, which is called I Am the Audience, and it's my the book where I try to make sense out of the 20 years that I wasted being in bands. So it's like a music memoir of that time of my life. And you can get all those books at my store, which is on my website, GideonKendall.com/store, I think. Yeah, and early next year, Dark Horse is going to be putting out the book that I did with Eric Powell called Lester of the Lesser Gods. And also Dark Horse is going to be re-releasing the Mega Ghost graphic novel that I did a couple of years ago with Gabe Soria, and then later that year publishing a new collection of Mega Ghosts. Yeah.
Wow, you're busy. You guys got a lot going on. So yeah, I published this this small comics and art book company in Philadelphia called Beehive Books, and we do a lot of illustrated fiction and adaptations of classics. So people who are interested in Marley's Ghost might want to go to beehivebooks.com and see some of the beautiful art book versions of literary classics we have there. And they make very good Christmas presents as well. And we're always coming out.
They're beautiful.
And yeah, if anybody, if there's any publishers out there that want to publish all ages dark fantasy graphic novel that Gideon and I are working on, just email us. And yeah, you can find my stuff at beehivebooks.com or at beehivebooks on Instagram, or if you search Beehive Books, will pop up.
Oh, cool. And anytime you guys want to come back and talk about any of those other projects, you guys are more than welcome. And
love to, man.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you for having us.
Well, thanks for taking the time, and it's great meeting you at New York Comic Con. And to you guys and to the people watching or seeing this video, hope that you don't nobody gets visited by 3 ghosts this year. And if they visit,
which one is which? Which one is which?
Because if they visit me, I got a lot of questions. My luck, it'll probably be the one where the ghost appears with the alternate me going, "You could have been that." Anyway, as my co-host likes to say, the world can be a crappy place, but do something good. It's the holidays. Go to your local comic book shops. Buy Marley's Ghost. Buy gifts there, and we will probably be back next week for more Comic Watchers.